This is C-SPAN's Afterwards podcast. Bloomberg News' Brad Stone reports on the growth and evolution of Amazon and profiles its founder, Jeff Bezos. His book is called Amazon Unbound.
I'm very excited to be here to interview you today for your new book, Amazon Unbound. Before we start, I just want to tell you, when I first started covering Amazon about 5 years ago, the first thing I did was to read your previous book about Amazon, The Everything Store. So for me, it's a true honor to get this opportunity, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks, Eugene. People probably don't know this, but the fraternity of reporters who cover Amazon is a small one, and we all kind of know each other. And you've just done tremendous work covering Amazon, and so it's great to talk to someone who is steeped in this secretive, bizarre, highly productive company like Amazon.
Thanks. So I think the first thing I'd like to ask is just the timing of the book. It ended up becoming incredibly prescient, the perfect time to publish a new book about Amazon, just given Jeff Bezos is stepping down in a couple of months. But can you kind of tell us what was the catalyst or, your thinking behind coming up with this book?
Sure. And of course, I did not time it. I did not have any idea that Jeff Bezos would be leaving as CEO of Amazon. In fact, I started this book really in the beginning of 2018. And so the list of things, that I didn't know about is long. HQ2, I think I think it was just being announced, and that played out in the early stages of my research. Jeff's personal saga, his divorce from McKinsey, the whole tabloid scrum over his personal life, that all happened midway through my research. And then I was writing it during the pandemic, this extraordinary time when, Amazon, already a very rapidly growing company, was basically given an injection of steroids and also moved into the center of this, acrimonious debate over how it treats its workers and the safety of warehouse workers during the age of COVID-19. So it was all a surprise. The reason I wrote the book and decided to do another Amazon book, which, Eugene, I'm sure you can appreciate is like just being a total glutton for punishment, is because I was really proud of the Everything Store. And yet it just occurred to me over the years that it was a sort of dated history. Well, it wasn't a dated history. It was part of the story, right? It was the beginning. It was the origin, the rise of Jeff Bezos, the origin of Amazon. And yet then there was Alexa, and the growth of the transportation network and the explosion in the Amazon marketplace. And so much had happened. The $150 billion company had become the $1 trillion company. Bezos was the wealthiest person in the world. And I realized there was a whole nother chapter to the saga.
Right. And I personally love the intro, the first scene of the book. It kind of, it's like an opening scene of a movie. And basically it starts at this kind of celebrity-packed event in 2019. Bezos is at the center of attention. And it sets the tone for the entire book. What were you trying to capture, or what does that say about the period of Amazon you were trying to capture in this book?
So the opening anecdote of the book is Jeff Bezos being inducted into the Smithsonian's Portrait Gallery. This is the sanctified hall of the most famous Americans throughout history: Frederick Douglass, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, and Bezos, along with a half a dozen other people like Lin-Manuel Miranda, are being inducted. Their portraits are going to hang in the gallery. And, there he is at the opening ceremony. His son, Preston, introduces him. He gives a speech. He's surrounded by the upper crust elite of American society, politicians, media. And, there were a number of things I really liked about it. One thing that he said in his speech is, he commended the artist for the portrait, which is quite severe. I don't know if you've seen it, Eugene, but it's, he looks scary in his portrait, and he commends the artist for kind of portraying him scars and all. He says, you can really, he says, I've gathered a lot of scars in the last 20 years leading Amazon. And that's one thing the portrait shows, I think, metaphorical scars. And so I like that because the book, was going to be an account of his warts and all, rise to power. And so to me, it really, just represented the journey that I was going to hopefully take readers on.
Yeah. So if you had to sum up this period you wrote about, it's sort of like a sequel to your earlier book. I think I saw your tweet about comparing this to Star Wars, or
Empire. This is the Empire Strikes Back.
but yeah. So how is this Amazon or this new Jeff Bezos different from the one you wrote about in your first book?
He absolutely is different. And there's a number of ways. The first and most obvious is visibly he's a different guy, right? The sort of awkward tech nerd from Seattle, always sort of unfashionable, the crazy laugh, the presentations that were incredibly esoteric and technical, like his introduction of the Fire Phone. That's the Jeff Bezos of the everything store. And over the last 5 years, I mean, first of all, kudos to his physical trainer, right? Because, that's quite an exercise regimen. And he's much more fashionable. I think it seems plausible that Lauren Sanchez, his partner, has boosted his fashion levels quite a bit. He's got the sunglasses and the and the crisp suits. Okay, so that's one dimension of change. I think another is, the Everything Store is the portrait of quite a brutal CEO who's very punishing, and sets high standards and kind of lashes out at underlings who don't meet a standard. It's very Steve Jobs-like management style. And I think he's evolved in that way as well. I mean, there are many fewer of those kinds of stories in Amazon Unbound. There are some in that respect. Maybe it's a little Godfather 2-like in that we're flashing back to Jeff tearing up documents and throwing them at employees and motivating them in that way. He's got a more delicate touch now. And yet, he still has the founder's magic, sets high bars. Employees kind of scramble to answer his question mark emails and to satisfy him. And then the other way is different. The last way I think he's significantly different is that his focus has expanded so much. He was laser focused for so long on Amazon and building this mechanism, this system of invention that could carry on. And now, and this is, I think, the territory that Amazon Unbound covers is, his purchase of the Washington Post, his deeper involvement in Blue Origin, his space company, his philanthropy, obviously. His eyes have opened up to a much larger world, and I think that's a little bit behind his resignation as CEO. There's so much more that he's doing now. He's not just he's gone from being the iconic tech CEO of the Everything Store into this global presence of Amazon Unbound.
Yeah. And also the company itself, the Amazon that he's leading, the profile has completely changed from the first book to now, right? It's like this conglomerate that's in every business market you could imagine.
And one way, I think, to really bring that home is when we think back to Amazon's battles with the book publishers and how trivial those seem now, right? In the larger scheme of things. Not that those are significant issues for the book industry, but Amazon was fighting with the book publishers over the $9.99 Kindle price and the availability of the number of ebooks in the Kindle store. And and it was stripping suppliers out of the search results if they weren't satisfying Amazon. And it was because the book business was so strategic. And this was 2011, 2012. And now, the book business, obviously still very representative of Amazon and its image. I think a lot of people probably still do think of Amazon as a bookseller, but it is a minor part of its business. I mean, this is a company that it truly is the Everything Store now. One of its most important markets is no longer the Kindle, but Alexa, the voice-activated computer. It's investing billions of dollars in India. It has global ambitions, and probably thinks more about Hollywood and TV shows and movies in terms of important content than books.
Yeah. And while we're talking about Bezos's transformation, what did other Amazon executives think about it? I think in your book you say some senior leaders were happy about the increased autonomy, independence, while some people were disappointed because, Bezos basically failed to meet his own high standards by becoming fodder for tabloid.
Are we okay? We're talking about the tabloid. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, we can both kind of acknowledge how difficult it is, right, to get Amazon executives to talk, particularly on the record, right, about their boss. It's a sort of radioactive topic. I think, fortunately, like, this was a long-term project, and it was, the elephant in the room that maybe needed to be addressed. I think if you're asking, like, how did they respond to the tabloid scandals of late 2018, early 2019, with I think like probably both of us, with utter astonishment. Like, how could the world's smartest and most disciplined man be part of this, get caught up in this? The National Enquirer, right, a tabloid, that hasn't really been relevant for many years, splashing his personal life, the personal life of an intensely private person, on its pages, and then Jeff responding with that famous blog post on Medium, accusing the Enquirer of having political motives and maybe a little bit of international intrigue, saying the Saudi example was still to be better understood. Amazon executives and employees were absolutely astonished, and I definitely heard disappointment from many quarters, that he allowed himself to be subjected to this. But I think we have to acknowledge that Bezos played it masterfully, right? The Medium post, and we can get into, whether his accusations of political intrigue were true, but it swung sympathies to his side. And I think that despite the disappointment, a lot of folks at Amazon and around Amazon had to sort of grudgingly acknowledge that, once again, Jeff had won. Like, he outmaneuvered his enemies. And now we look back and we say, yeah, that was a really bizarre episode. But it's pretty much in the past, and Bezos, as usual, came out on top.
Yeah. Did you talk to Bezos or Mackenzie Scott, his ex-wife, or maybe, I think you mentioned, like, you talked to 300 or 400 Amazon executives, right. But can you tell us a little bit about your reporting?
Sure. And here, well, first of all, Eugene, you probably remember that when the Everything Store came out, Mackenzie Bezos, gave me a 1-star review. And I sort of bragged that it was the most famous book review, ever. It's certainly sort of up there. But what it reflected was that they didn't like the first book. They thought it was, there were they had a number of problems with it. And, I wasn't going for a sycophantic portrait, but, an honest picture of a company that was challenging to work for and to work with, but had nevertheless risen to be very powerful in our society. So I had to get past some of the memory from the first book. In the end, Amazon did cooperate. They authorized a couple of dozen interviews with top executives like Andy Jassy and Jeff Wilke and Dave Clark, who is now the CEO of the consumer business after Jeff Wilke retired. Bezos would not talk to me. And Mackenzie Scott, as far as I can tell, has done one interview with Vogue magazine years and years ago, tied to a book launch, but tends to be an intensely private person who has so far avoided the media spotlight.
Got it. So maybe we can start with the first chapter of the book. I think there's a lot of great anecdotes about Bezos's role in coming up with Alexa and the Echo. And I think the common thread is that Bezos set the bar really high. He pushed the team to aim for almost irrational goals, right? I think one quote I remember is, "You guys aren't serious about making this product."
And he walks out of the room.
So how important was Bezos for coming up with this device that, arguably the most successful personal device that Amazon came up with?
Sure. we're probably going to talk about Amazon as a potential monopolist, as a dominating force in American business. So I don't mind, and this is why I start the book off this way, giving Amazon credit and Jeff Bezos credit as an innovative company and Bezos as an inventor. And that's how he likes to describe himself, as an inventor. And when I dug into the history of Alexa, it was surprising because the real story had not been told. And essentially, the idea for Alexa springs right out of Jeff's mind in an email in late 2010. He sends a note to Greg Hart, who's his technical assistant at the time, kind of the chief of staff, Ian Freed, Steve Kessel, a couple of executives, and he says, why don't we build a $20 computer whose brains are in the cloud that uses AWS, which is completely controlled by your voice. And that was a really kind of radical notion. This idea that, most speech recognition systems at that time, you spoke right into. Okay, that makes it really easy. So speaking to a device across the room was going to be a technical challenge. And then there's the challenge of, having it understand you and respond. That required an advance in artificial intelligence. But Bezos was doing a couple of things. One, he was looking for ways to exploit Amazon's early lead in Amazon Web Services. And he was looking for ways to kind of, move Amazon into everyday use in people's lives. So to answer your question, he conceives the project. He puts Greg Hart, his chief of staff, in charge of it. And then he's the Uber product manager. That's kind of what they call him. He drives the vision. He meets with the team sometimes several times a week. He picks Alexa's voice. He makes decisions about what features it should have. He wrestles with the team about whether Alexa's going to basically just do practical stuff like playing music. He wants it to be the Star Trek computer, kind of a versatile artificial intelligence. And then, he sets the bar high. First, he says he wants it to launch in six months, which is impossible. It takes 3 years. But he constantly drives the team. He authorizes probably the biggest impact he had. He's willing to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on it. At one point, he says to Greg Hart, hire all the AI folks that you can. There shouldn't be any limit. He gives him carte blanche to go and hire any smart AI or speech person who's available on the market. And when the CEO is behind something like that, particularly the founder, that gives, in any company, that's going to give a project a lot of momentum.
Yeah. With Bezos's role as this, key product manager, I think you raise a really interesting point in your book that also creates this culture of fear where people are too afraid to, argue against or bring up different ideas or, say it's not a good idea against Bezos. Is that did that affect, Alexa's product roadmap or results in any way, or
right.
Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that the big illustration of that is the Fire Phone, right? That was another idea, and I nestle the Fire Phone story in the Alexa chapter. And Jeff had this idea that you could have a 3D screen and a premium handset and differentiate from the iPhone, and nobody on the team thought it was a good idea. In fact, they had dog tags made that said disagree and commit, a kind of Amazon saying, which stood for we've got to do this, but we don't agree with the product roadmap. And it didn't seem like anybody really stood up to Jeff's vision. To answer your question, in terms of Alexa, sure, there were features that launched with the original Echo, they're too obscure even to name, but they launched because Jeff wanted it. But, to probably broadly say no one's willing to stand up to him, I don't think it's right. I think there are good contentious discussions in some of these product meetings, but I think that he's the founder. He's got an incredible record of success, and that brings a lot of credibility. And if sometimes people disagree, if he insists, it's probably going to happen. Yeah,
and looking back at Bezos's track record as a product manager, there's only a handful of, big projects that he was, I think, directly engaged in, right? The Fire Phone, Alexa, maybe Amazon Go, the studios, but, there's sort of a mixed record so far. What's his legacy as a product manager? Do you think he's still like a Steve Jobs type of visionary or,
Without a doubt. I mean, no one's batting average is going to be 1,000. And when you think about, he has remade a number of industries, and it's not just e-commerce, but it's enterprise computing, and AWS, as he had some of the original insights for that. And then you look at the Kindle, a vision and a product he drove. It really changed book selling. And now Alexa, and in ushering in the age of voice computing, I think the jury is still out on long term how successful Alexa could be. But it certainly has inspired a lot of competing products. I think that it's an extraordinary record of success. And we can talk about, some of the downsides, because there were a lot of things that Jeff created or helped to create, like the Amazon marketplace, that got to a certain size. And then instead of being the Uber product manager, he took a step back and he said, you guys manage this independently. It's really profitable. It's doing great. I don't want to be that involved anymore. And it veers off course and ends up, impacting and potentially hurting a lot of people. So, yeah. But, I think the overall record as an inventor is startling. And it's not just at Amazon. The turnaround at the Washington Post has been amazing as well.
Interesting. And so I think it's maybe a good time to talk about him stepping down and, maybe AWS and his successor, Andy Jassy. Maybe you can explain a little bit about who Jassy is, why AWS is so important to Amazon for the past 10 years.
Right. Well, a lot of people, over the years, when we had the discussion about who might be Bezos' successor, first we said, well, Jeff Bezos will be CEO forever. But if we really need to go through the exercise, it's either going to be Andy Jassy or Jeff Wilke. And both of those guys, and, unfortunately, a lot of the senior leadership up until recently has been very male at Amazon. But both of those guys joined in the late 90s and helped Bezos to kind of steer Amazon through the dot-com bust and really build it into what it is today. Jeff Wilke ran the consumer business, and he actually retired last year. And Andy Jassy was the shadow, the chief of staff early on in Amazon's lifespan. And he then took over this idea for AWS, or cloud computing. Now, as some people might remember, and it's kind of a relic of the past, Amazon for a long time was a very unprofitable company, right? It kind of lost money, and investors had a lot of patience for that. But AWS was always the sparkling gem in the portfolio because the operating margins and the net income was high. And this is cloud computing. It's a little difficult to understand to the layperson, but you think the company that used to have a data center in the back, walled off, humming with air conditioning, servers there sitting there blinking, no longer has that. Their computing power is on the internet in Amazon's data centers, or Google's, or Microsoft. That is cloud computing. Bezos, with Jassy's help, conceived that in the early 2000s, and it's a huge business now, $50 billion run rate annually. And Jassy, with a lot of independence from Bezos, has steered that. And so it's been a remarkable success, a profit engine for Amazon. And Jeff is now basically handing the company over to him. Now, a couple of things to note is Jeff is executive chairman, so he plans to remain involved. He says he wants to focus on new things. For Jassy, he's focused on AWS. It'll be a homecoming to the other parts of the business, the consumer parts. But my sense is that what was pivotal was last year that Eugene, you probably remember the hearing in the House Antitrust Committee where Bezos and Tim Cook and Mark Zuckerberg were required to testify. And the whole thing was a political circus, and Republicans were asking about suppression of GOP voices, and Democrats were asking about antitrust, and Bezos sat there gamely from Seattle in his office. And my sense is probably thought, why am I spending my time on this? So Andy Jassy will be in that hot seat now. He'll have to answer the hard questions, and Jeff will get to do what he likes to do, which is work on new things.
Yeah. And since you mentioned Jeff Wilke, who's basically, kind of Jassy's counterpart, or, the other right-hand man for Bezos, it felt like in your book, he was less featured compared to other executives. Was that intentional or just a result of your reporting? And any thoughts on the timing of his retirement, which kind of coincided with this whole transition?
It wasn't intentional. I mean, I think he's more featured in the Everything Store because he was the guy who really figured out how to make the warehouses work. And then he graduates and is the head of the consumer business. He's certainly in there quite a bit. But you're right. There's more of a focus on some of the up and coming executives like Dave Clark, who was Wilkie's protege and who is now running the consumer business, or Doug Harrington, who really was a major force in the Amazon's emergence as a grocer. Wilkie told Bezos he wanted to step aside in early 2020, and then the pandemic hit, and Jeff Wilkie, they all call him Jaw, said he would stick around to help navigate Amazon through it. He says that he did not know that Bezos was planning to step aside and anoint Andy Jassy as his successor. So maybe he's being disingenuous and saw the writing on the wall and thought, okay, I've lost some sort of political battle. My time here is done. I have no evidence for that. He just says, his time at Amazon was done. I think we can acknowledge, though, and actually, Eugene, you wrote a really good story about this in Business Insider, that the turnover, well, Amazon's always been somewhat known for having high turnover. The velocity of people moving into and out of the fulfillment centers and the lower ranks of the company is extreme for tech companies. They've always said that in the upper echelons that the loyalty is extreme and people stick around, and that has changed. More people are leaving. I heard a joke that people are calling it the Jexit, because so many people named Jeff have left, not just Bezos and Wilkie, but Blackburn as well. Jeff Blackburn, another senior executive. And whether that's because the stock price has gone up so high and they are enormously wealthy, or is it that they see that this has become a big and somewhat unmanageable company and the bureaucracy is severe, or, and this is a hypothetical, were they disappointed in the tabloid media scrum of 2019 and they lost a little bit of faith? I don't know, but we have to acknowledge that the old timers at Amazon are largely moving aside, and that will be a challenge for the company because it's a difficult, weird, idiosyncratic company to navigate, and there are a lot of newcomers now in positions of influence, and so that'll be interesting.
Yeah, and one of the key figures in that transition is obviously Dave Clark, the new retail CEO who replaced Jeff Wilkie this year, and you get into him a lot in the book. How would you describe him? Like, it kind of comes off as he's fiercely competitive, not afraid to throw people under the bus. Best man at his wedding got demoted by him. So
That's right. And, right. Someone mentioned to me that they thought it wasn't a very flattering portrait of Dave Clark. And I sort of objected to that because at its heart, it's a story of a guy who took a warehouse network of a couple of dozen fulfillment centers and which today, so sorry, we should step back and say Dave Clark for a long time ran Amazon operations, right? That's the fulfillment centers, the distribution centers, the vans that are driving our streets, the airplanes with Prime Air emblazoned on the side, everything that moves packages from A to B to your front door was overseen by Dave Clark. And when he took the job, he's been at Amazon forever, but when he took the job in 2012, there were a couple of dozen buildings, and now there are hundreds. The whole transportation thing is happening under his watch. He helped to build it. Airplanes, the success has been remarkable. So in a sense, that chapter asks the question, who's capable of building something like this, and what are the costs accrued along the way? And certainly, one cost is he when it came to personal relationships, the work was more important. And he had a friend, and I write about this in the book, another Amazon executive named Arthur Valdez, who was originally his boss, best man at his wedding. And when Valdez, ultimately went to Target, Dave never talked to him again. Right. And which is, for a lot of us is remarkable, but it shows how seriously, they take these rivalries, and then another aspect, I think, is that they built in a very tech company way. We hear about Facebook, move fast and break things. Right. Well, Amazon's in the physical world, and they built this transportation capability very much like with a FedEx or DHL model. They said, we're not going to employ these drivers we're going to hire contractors. We'll put them in an Amazon van, but we don't manage them because, God forbid, we don't want that headache or any of the union, troubles that might accompany it. And what happened, over the next couple of years is, there were stories of packages flung into gardens and, drivers bespoiling people's front yards, and in some cases much worse, accidents and even deaths. And I write about that, and that was the at least the temporary impact of moving fast and building this transportation capability. Amazon had strategic reasons to do it. They could no longer count on the Postal Service or UPS, but they moved very quickly, and it was a little bit of a troubled rollout. There's been a lot of litigation, and they've had to pay some settlements as a result of this. But you look today, and Amazon's delivering 70% of its own packages, and Dave Clark is promoted and is running now all of Amazon retail. So it's really a remarkable story of innovation and the mastery of operations, but in some sense the true cost when tech companies really move quickly without a lot of caution or appreciation for what some of the unanticipated consequences might be.
Yeah, and with Clark, it seems like he has a bit of a different reputation compared to Jassy or Jeff Wilke, who are almost universally liked or respected. Clark has more of a track record of, even creating enemies along the way. I think he calls himself the simplifier in your book. There's some people who I think his nickname was the sniper for firing people, but what's his reputation like? Is it going to work well in this new role? Or
well, I mean, one thing that people could look at is his Twitter stream, because he is the unusual Amazon CEO who will get out there and start trading blows with people. And he's got this ongoing thing about Fred Smith, the CEO of FedEx, and he takes shot at him. Tends to critique coverage of Amazon. I don't know, Eugene, have you ever been the subject of a Dave Clark tweet? He'll get out there. Yeah, he'll start throwing elbows. He's sort of like maybe even refreshingly kind of combative, because most Amazon executives will probably just, say that stuff quietly. And, he says what he believes. I think, the reputation, even among, and I talked to, a ton of Amazon operations folks in putting together my portrait, and even people that felt, discarded or trampled upon, who said his bedside manner was not good, which was quite a number of people. There was a admiration, maybe a grudging admiration, or maybe even just a sort of astonishment. Like, wow, this guy, built this huge network. He has fulfilled Jeff Bezos's dream of controlling the Amazon package from the fulfillment center to the customer's front door. What that allows is so much control over the customer experience. When you see Amazon say, your package will be there from 9 to 11, and then the follow-up email maybe even that says, we're delayed, it's going to be, sometime early afternoon. That is because Amazon controls its supply chain. Like, that couldn't have happened 10 years ago. When Amazon says it'll move from 2-day delivery to 1-day delivery for Prime members, and then the pandemic hits and it says it's going back to 2-day delivery, right? These are all things that are possible because of what Clark built. And so, I think it's a portrait of an effective executive who, is harsh and unrelenting, and that has allowed him to meet the harsh and unrelenting goals of his boss, the founder of the company.
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting to see how he plays with Jassy and Selipsky. Adam Selipsky is the new CEO for AWS. Like, this is a completely different dynamic compared to Bezos, Wilke, and Jassy, right?
Totally. So, I think you're right. And I think you're right. And there's also just a natural impulse. Like, everyone wants to everyone probably thinks that they can continue to do their old job in addition to their new job. So will Jassy give Selipsky room to run and maneuver at AWS? Will Bezos give Jassy room to be the CEO? Right. And, and then with Dave Clark, he is now the boss of some of his former peers. Will Doug Harrington or any of the other executives who run divisions, like like advertising and the devices business and the Alexa business. That one of their peers is now their boss, and that can create an uncomfortable dynamic as well.
Yeah. And so I think we should spend some time talking about Donald Trump. He's clearly a big piece of Amazon's narrative over the past 4 or 5 years. There's this mutual animosity between Bezos and Trump. You get into it a lot in the book. Was it a good thing that this happened, or was it Bezos's fault for, did he lose anything for not fostering a better relationship with Trump, or, what's the assessment?
Yeah, those are really good questions. I think when I finished the book, I might have thought that Bezos, he got off on the wrong foot, right? I have these emails in the book. It's the end of 2015. Donald Trump is campaigning to be president. He's taken shots at everyone, and Bezos enters the fray with an email that basically sent Donald to space. Like we're saving you a seat on a Blue Origin rocket. And Jay Carney and some other PR executives at Amazon were asking Jeff not to send those emails. And he sort of insisted. And I don't know if he was just being protective of the Post. I suspect that was it. But maybe there was a little bit of ego there. Like, everyone else is getting into it with this guy. I want my turn too, taking a shot at him. And then Trump won, which is, seems like a lifetime ago, but I guess it was 5 years ago. And, and Bezos gets hammered. Now, he probably would have gotten hammered anyway because he owns the Washington Post. The Post does a great job covering the Trump administration. But the ramifications of that bitterness are that, Amazon loses the Jedi contract, right? $10 billion, a huge leg up in the portion of the cloud business that caters to governments and public institutions. Huge problems with the post office, and a lot of publicity around just Trump's bitterness towards the Post and Bezos in particular. Now, a lot of what Trump wanted to do never happened. Like he talked about raising corporate taxes and asked why Amazon was paying so few taxes. Made ridiculous claims about the Post being a lobbyist for Amazon. None of that was true. But so recently, the judge in the Jedi case, ruled that Amazon should be able to continue to protest that decision, which was awarded to Microsoft, raising the possibility that the Pentagon goes back and rethinks that whole process. So it's possible now, with the space of a little bit of time and reflection, that Amazon and Jeff didn't lose much in terms of their ongoing fight with the Trump administration. Probably they would have preferred to fly a little bit under the radar, but I think with Jeff's ownership of the Washington Post, that was probably going to be impossible.
Yeah, I think that whole email thread between Bezos and Jay Carney on how to respond to Trump, that was my personal favorite part of the book. So that was very good. But how unusual is this, like, for a business leader to have a very public tension with the sitting president? I mean, there has to have a lot of internal discussions on how this is slowing down the business, or how to respond to this. Anything else?
Well,
to add?
I suspect it's not unusual for the owners of papers, right? And Katharine Graham, famously tangled with the Nixon administration. And this is something that Bezos took on in 2013 when he bought the Post. We can look, though, at the 4 years of Trump and say Amazon had an extraordinary rate of growth, right? I mean, talk about one of the most fertile periods for any American business almost in history. And, and part of that was the pandemic and the last year of the Trump administration, but it certainly doesn't seem to have slowed Amazon down at all. And you could argue, perversely, probably, that Trump's bungling and mismanagement of the pandemic, which arguably extended it, helped Amazon, right? Because the pandemic has been, almost a grotesque boost to its bottom line at a time when people were scared of shopping in stores. Yeah.
And since you bring up the Washington Post, And you dedicate a whole chapter on that topic too. But I'm still trying to understand why Bezos bought the Washington Post. I mean, maybe he really believes in a free press, but at the same time, he's, for someone who believes in free press, he's very unfriendly to the press too.
Isn't that a funny little paradox?
Yeah. So, what's the true reason for this? Why does he want it so bad?
Right. Well, I mean, first of all, it was circumstance, right? Don Graham was looking to sell the Washington Post in 2013. The paper was in a kind of perpetual decline. They didn't have the finances to truly make it a national newspaper, and he went out looking for a savior. He had a personal relationship with Bezos, so a lot of it was simply circumstance. But I think Jeff appreciated and saw the Post and the opportunity for what it was. Maybe in the back of his mind, thought about the influence in having the Post and Amazon's future trajectory. That would be important. But I also think that, and hopefully this comes out in the book, that one of his talents, one of his interests, is not just invention, but it's creating a system of invention. What are the mechanisms and the meetings and the papers and the rituals that can encourage businesses to do new things and to grow? And he had been very successful in creating a system of invention at Amazon. Not at all successful creating one at Blue Origin. We could talk about that. But I think that with the Post, he saw a kind of broken institution where he could come in and kind of work his magic, the documents, the meetings, bring me new things, and apply his thinking to a really valuable American institution and help turn it around. And he has done that, right? The renaissance at the Post under Marty Baron, and now soon his successor, maybe even by the time this is aired, has been remarkable. And Bezos' system of invention worked really well there.
I agree. And we should probably talk a little bit about Hollywood. I think in your book, you make it clear that Bezos relished the limelight. There's a part where you say Mackenzie was having a good time at these parties, but Bezos was having a great time, right? What was this a good decision on Bezos? Like, it ultimately led to a lot of personal issues and tabloid and all these stuff. Kind of the move into Hollywood kind of instigated that. But right. What's your thoughts?
I think it's easier to look at these things, not to look back and ask the big question: why did Jeff Bezos go to Hollywood? Why is Amazon funding movies and TV shows? But to follow the chain of events. So really quickly, okay. So Amazon's biggest category of sales in the 2000s is media, books, movies, and music. Music goes away because of the iPod and iTunes, and now online music. They see that, they rush out the Kindle to make sure it doesn't happen in books. Well, DVD sales are going down. Right? I mean, that's a 20-year trend. And Netflix is rising. So what does Amazon do? It creates a video store where you can download movies and TV shows. That model starts to fray. Now it's streaming. You have to pay billions of dollars to license Friends or Seinfeld. That's competitive. Netflix and Amazon are competing to do that. They're enriching the movie studios. How do you get out of this battle for just paying for content? You make your own. Right? It's cheaper. And this is going back to the days of HBO and Showtime. Everyone has figured this out. It's cheaper and more effective. And you have more of a hold on your customers when you make your own programs instead of just licensing them. And so Amazon gets into that business. And yeah, Bezos ends up loving it. He's surrounded by celebrities. He goes to parties with Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, and here's the crazy thing. You have a big tent full of stars, and everyone's orbiting around him, right? Because it's 2015, 2016. He's one of the wealthiest people in the world. He's an icon. Steve Jobs has passed away. He represents American innovation and ingenuity. And look, he's human, and I think he really enjoyed that. And you make the point that, and we don't know if this contributed to the end of their marriage, but certainly Mackenzie did not seem to enjoy it as much. Jeff loved going to the award shows, and Jimmy Kimmel starts making fun of him. He loves it, right? He's laughing. And so, yeah, not only was it a strategic bet, and it aligned very nicely with his personal geekiness, science fiction and fantasy. They bought the Lord of the Rings. Who knows if that's going to be good or not? But he loves the attention, and his eyes start to open up along with the post and all these other things into this larger world beyond Amazon. And then the last really quick thing about this is it was also smart to bundle it in as a benefit for Prime members. If we think that today Prime is still just shipping, right? That's all it is, 2-day or 1-day shipping. Well, there's a fulfillment center outside of San Francisco, right? They probably get that stuff to us in 1 or 2 days anyway. And so Bezos brings Prime Video into the bundle of Amazon perks, and then all sorts of other things join it, Amazon Music and Photos. And they're not competing head-to-head with Netflix anymore, right? Prime Video, you almost think of it as free, but it's bundled into that $119 annual Prime membership. And Amazon has a seat at the table in this revolution in media. So it was very smart. It was very strategic. And then it did have all sorts of consequences for Jeff and his personal life as well.
Yeah. And you bring a lot of characters to life in this book, people that I only read about. And one of the interesting executives was Doug Harrington. And he runs the marketplace, he deals with the sellers. I think this internal report you found titled Amazon's Future is Crap. And, Harrington kind of urges the executive teams to look into selling groceries, and that kind of inspired Bezos to even ultimately buy Whole Foods, right? And I thought it was really interesting that Bezos said, this one really made me think. So can you kind of talk about that whole process, Harrington, and the move into groceries?
So let me give a little bit of context. The paper that you're talking about is at an executive retreat in maybe, I think, 2012. And this is another mechanism in the Bezos system of invention. They're all required to bring papers presenting or pitching a new idea. And then they all sit there in silence reading them. And then afterwards, Jeff picks up Doug's, Amazon's Future is Crap, and says, this one made me think. Well, some more history. Doug comes from Webvan, the famous .com flameout that tried to deliver groceries. It went out of business. It didn't work, but he always thought the idea was good. And he joined Amazon. They started Amazon Fresh in 2007. It limped along for a couple of years, and Bezos never really invested in it. He thought other things like Alexa and the Fire Phone and China and India were more important. So then in 2012, Doug brings this paper, and it argues that, I'm going to summarize, that people are buying things from Amazon once a week, once every other week. But at Walmart or at Kroger or at Telfor, they're going there multiple times a week to buy food. And that customer relationship, even though it's unprofitable, and CRAP stands for can't realize a profit, or it's very low margin, creates a strong bond with the customer. And if those retailers ever get into the Amazon business and figure out how to do e-commerce, it could be very dangerous and disruptive. And Jeff says, this made me think, and he begins to authorize more ambitious investments, larger investments, more ambitious projects in groceries. And so they expand Amazon Fresh, doesn't quite work. They try Prime Now, a kind of 2-hour delivery service in New York. It expands, but my sense was it always lost money. And they introduced the Ghost Store, the cashierless grocery store, and they go on a journey. And Bezos tends to think about things as land rushes and kind of long-term opportunities. He always thought groceries was more of a long-term opportunity. And then a couple things start to happen. Google introduces Google Express, Instacart starts to get very popular, and finally he realizes this is a land rush. He has to get serious about it. Whole Foods in 2017 was in trouble. It was being attacked by activist investors, and then they went and made that purchase. And now Amazon's opening up its own supermarkets all over the place, and partly thanks to the pandemic, I think online grocery shopping really has caught on. So yeah, Doug, I think by virtue of his experience, his war wounds at Webvan was pretty integral in helping Amazon kind of get the religion and catch up in that category.
I also want to spend some time on Blue Origin, since that's where Bezos presumably is going to spend a lot of his time going forward. it sounds like based on your book, there were some hiccups or mismanagement, some rivalry with Elon Musk, jealousy played into it. What's kind of your assessment? What's kind of his track record basically with Blue Origin?
I mean, so far, right, they don't have a lot to show for it. Jeff is investing, or he's selling $1 billion in Amazon stock every year. He's investing a lot of that into Blue Origin. It's a 20-year-old company, and they haven't met any of their goals yet. We're speaking during a week when Blue Origin might start selling tickets to New Shepard, the suborbital spacecraft. But meanwhile, SpaceX is launching rockets into orbit to the International Space Station seemingly every week. And yeah, I mean, I think that to put it succinctly, Jeff thought he could go slow. He said, be the tortoise, not the hare, step by step, ferociously. That's the motto of Blue Origin. And, when you're the conservative guy at the poker table and you have a whole strategy, that strategy is sometimes blown up when the ambitious and maybe reckless guy shows up and starts betting on everything. And look, I mean, Elon shows up, he skips suborbital to go into orbit with his rockets. And it works, and the government starts basically paying him, to giving him these big contracts to build his company. And Jeff is personally funding it. And I don't know if it's jealousy, but I do think rivalry is an accurate word. He's personally spending all this money, and Elon is getting, quote, paid to practice. And so he changes the orientation of Blue Origin. He starts hiring a lot more people. He starts setting ambitious goals instead of step by step, ferociously, a lot of overlapping initiatives. And I do think, and my sense is, and I think this is in the book, that it's really helped to seed a little bit of a dysfunctional culture there. They're still trying to figure it out. Maybe later this year, they'll start sending tourists into suborbital space, and it'll be a tremendous triumph and success. But so far, I don't think he has a lot to show for it.
And before we run out of time, so I guess this is going to be one of the last questions, but what is Bezos's legacy since he's stepping down? He's still going to be engaged. He's not retiring, but how will history remember Bezos as Amazon's CEO?
That's a good one, Eugene. Tempted to ask you to go first. Look, I mean, I think that a lot of it might actually be yet to play out. I think that we will see some kind of antitrust case against Amazon in the years ahead. I think we'll see a regulation as governments try to grapple with some of the paradoxes of the Amazon model. The fact that it's a platform for sellers and a seller, the fact that it sells private label products in competition with and sometimes using the data of some of its independent sellers. The stories that sellers are telling now about Amazon are not uniformly good, right? There's a lot of consternation there. And we look back and we look at a Rockefeller, and that's colored a little bit by the government action. But let's acknowledge that and say, we'll acknowledge that the legacy, is still not yet completed and might have some asterisks next to it. But we'll put that aside and say, and to give Jeff credit and say that it's likely with the passage of time that a lot of the negativity is going to fade, and we'll be left thinking about someone who revolutionized business and in the span of 20 years built a company that has changed the world in a number of ways, not just online shopping, but reading and voice computing and enterprise computing, the way governments operate and companies and research institutions. And I really do think the only comparison is Steve Jobs in terms of the number of industries that he has changed. And who knows? I mean, he might end up doing more, with respect to space and Blue Origin, that would be a tremendous accomplishment if that company is successful. But I think, as an innovator and as a business builder, there's lots of room to criticize Jeff and Amazon. But in those respects, I think he'll stand as one of the great business leaders of our time.
Great. Well, I think that's all the questions I have. And Well, thanks again for your time. Appreciate it. I learned a lot. It's a great book again. But looking forward to our continuing conversation.
Thanks, Eugene. Good to talk to you.
Thanks for listening to C-SPAN's Afterwards podcast. You might be interested in another C-SPAN podcast, Book Notes Plus. Like our long-running program, Brian Lamb has wide-ranging conversations with authors and historians. The 30-minute podcast is available every Tuesday. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.